My mother was a movie brat, by which I mean her parents, my grandparents, owned 2 drive-ins and 5 single-screen cinemas in Northwest Alabama. Jesse James, anything with Jesse James in the title was always a good booking, as was Thunder Road at the drive-in. In 1950, they decided to show Destination Moon, and my grandfather built a huge rocket that he put on the back of a pickup truck and drove all over Northwest Alabama in order to get butts in seats at the theater. Later that same year, my grandmother felt like North Alabama could use some culture. So based on the title alone, she booked a film called French Follies. Turned out to be a dirty, I like that laughter. Turns out it was a dirty movie. It was a 1950 dirty movie, but whatever. You know, the townspeople claimed to be scandalized, but they showed up every night. My grandmother is whom I'm named after. She was the original Glenera, the OG, is how I like to think of her. She was a movie brat herself. Her father, my great-grandfather, owned a picture show in Pasadena, Texas. And my grandmother, when she was young, would sleep on a cot in the projection booth. So these film reels going above her head all night, night after night. So I think that it's 2 generations of all these nights at the movies that made my family into show people. We are actors and dancers and stagehands and stuntmen. We are never so comfortable anywhere as we are on stage, unless it's running sound in the booth or tearing tickets at the door. In spite of this family, or maybe because of it, I avoided show business for as long as I could. I opted instead for journalism, noble profession, right? And I was the editor of an alt weekly here in Birmingham about 5 years ago when a buddy of mine came into my office and pitched me on a story about that vaudeville theater across the street from the Alabama. To which I said, there's not a vaudeville theater across the street from the Alabama. You know, I grew up in Birmingham and I come from show people. And I knew about the Alabama theater, especially what I knew about it was you know, it's the showplace of the South, this spectacular place, a 1927 Paramount Publix movie palace with 2,200 seats and a Wurlitzer that rises out of the floor. That place was actually facing a bulldozer back in the 1980s, but guess who saved it? Show people. Although in that case, some very unlikely show people, a bunch of old white guys who loved to play the theater organ. And what they actually didn't care about saving the theater, what they really wanted to do was save the Wurlitzer. But they get into the project and they realize that the only way to do that is to save the whole building. At the Alabama Theater, the soundboard is built into the walls. So if you take that organ out of the theater, it's just a box of pipes. You could sell it for parts, probably, but you couldn't play it. So they decided they'd save the whole building. And the way they did it was they popped popcorn. And they put on ushers' jackets, and they showed Gone with the Wind over and over and over again. But it worked, right? The late, great Cecil Whitmire would play a few numbers on the organ and then pass around a KFC chicken bucket as a donation plate, as the offering. And everybody's eyes are on the big screen, right? In the showplace of the South. So I knew that story. I knew about the Alabama. So this writer says to me, how about that vaudeville theater across the street? And I said, there's not a vaudeville theater across the street. And he said, yes, there is. And I said, no, there's not. And he said, yes, there is. And I said, no, there's not. And he said, boss, there is. And I said, well, you got to show me. Now, as familiar to me at that point as the story of the Alabama Theater was the story of Ruffner Mountain. I don't know if you know it, but it's a 1,000-acre nature preserve in the Birmingham city limits. They have turtles and owls and snakes and raptors and 7 kinds of pine trees and cypress and sycamore and even a weird flowering plant called a moon tree, which I like to think Destination Moon and my grandfather's rocket affected somehow. But I'm way more likely to be reading IMDb than I am to be reading any kind of nature guide. But I knew about Ruffner because of show people. Or at least in that case, one show person. See, like the Alabama, Ruffner was in danger of being destroyed. It wasn't facing a bulldozer, it was facing the possibility of an earth mover. But there was this one woman who couldn't stand to see this spectacular wilderness turned into cookie-cutter houses. These developers thought it would make a great subdivision, but this one woman felt, no way. So she made a promise to the mountain, which sounds a little crazy. She went out into the woods and hand over heart said, "Ruffner Mountain, I will save you." The first time I saw the lyric wasn't quite as dramatic as that. I think I actually saw it twice before I decided to commit my professional life to it. Cecil Whitmire, one of those organ players, took me in there. He showed it to me. And at that time, it was a plain brown box of a building, totally nondescript on the outside. There was a forklift parked in the lobby. The stage was covered in trash. But oddly, that's not what I saw. What I saw was concrete and steel and silicaga marble and burlesque and vaudeville and black and white and slapstick and monkeys riding bicycles and diving horses and all of this history and all of it hidden. And I actually jumped up and down and said, "Oh my God, I've got to show people." So, I was still working as a journalist, but over the next few years, I quit my job twice in a stupid economy in order to spend more time in an abandoned theater. The second time I quit a job to do this, I called my dad and I said, "I don't have a job anymore, but I have a key to the Lyric Theater." And he said, "Honey, that's great," which explains a lot about show people and my father in particular. So I could not get enough of this place. I kept showing up, and I kept showing up, and I kept showing it to other people. And I stuck around long enough that I learned the history of the place, which goes more or less like this. The Lyric was built in 1913, and it opened in 1914. And the headlining act during the opening week was Rube Goldberg. So I've come to think the Rube Goldberg device is a terrific metaphor for this theater and for downtown redevelopment too. But the giants of early 20th century show business performed there because it was a vaudeville house. The Marx Brothers, Buster Keaton and his family, Sophie Tucker, Mae West, Roy Rogers, and Trigger, who did not go on the stage, is my favorite part of that. But Houdini never played the Lyric, but his brother Hardin did. In this weird career that I've chosen, I spend a lot of time researching old vaudeville acts, and currently my favorite whoever played the Lyric is Dan, the original drunk dog. Not to be confused with all the drunk dogs that followed, right? Milton Berle, there were a lot. Milton Berle performed at the Lyric at a point in his career when he was a really young stand-up comedian. And he would bring his mother with him on tour, and she would be a planted heckler in the audience. Uncle Milty told us this story in the 1990s when he came to visit the Lyric and the Alabama. And one of the other things that he said was that it was as fine as any theater in New York, that it had stood out in his mind through decades. And that guy played 1,000 houses, but he remembered the Lyric because he was so shocked that there was a theater that beautiful in the South. So I want you to close your eyes for a second, or I'm gonna close my eyes, I don't care what you do. And imagine that you're standing in the lobby of the Lyric, okay? You're on the corner of 18th Street and 3rd Avenue North in downtown Birmingham. And at this beautiful intersection, and within 5 blocks of where you're standing, there are 27 theaters. What? It was really at the center of a thriving entertainment district. A couple of burlesques, a couple of vaudeville houses, a couple of opera houses, mostly movie theaters, but 27 theaters. That, my friends, is an entertainment district. What was remarkable about, Birmingham, oddly, was really sort of a big deal show business town. Like I said, most of them were movie theaters. During the entirety of segregation, all the theaters on 2nd and 3rd were white theaters, and all the theaters on 4th Avenue were black theaters. But the Lyric was the first, and for a long time, the only theater in the city where black and white audiences saw the same show at the same time for the same price. This should not be mistaken for any kind of bastion of progressivism. It wasn't. There were still segregated entrances and segregated seating. But one of the remarkable things about what I do now is I get to show people this space where we sat together and apart. It was as integrated an entertainment venue as existed in the city at that time. The top balcony, the gallery, it's the only spot in the theater where we still have seats. And I love to take people up there because, there are plenty of buildings in Birmingham that we know are segregated, but it's really rare that you get to have this profound, vivid encounter with a segregated space. In addition to all this race and civil rights history, I think it offers this great lesson in public health, because let me tell you that after 50 years of McDonald's, 21st century backsides, black or white, will not fit in these seats, my friends. We have grown a little bit. The lyric, it's beautiful. As I was saying, it has 3 levels: the orchestra, the mezzanine, and the balcony. Above this stage, there's a mural under the proscenium arch. It's the oldest extant mural in the city. It's called The Allegory of the Muses, and it was painted Michelangelo style by an artist on his back on scaffolding. Beneath that is a curtain that was made in 1912 and has been hanging in the same place since 1913. Right in the center of it, in this very florid script, it says, "Asbestos!" They were very pleased at having this wonderful safety feature. In fact, a lot of theaters still use asbestos fire curtains. They just don't advertise it quite so prominently anymore. To go back to the history, so the Alabama Theater opened in 1927. Like I said, it's got 2,200 seats, a Wurlitzer rising out of the floor. On the shingle outside the Alabama, there's a sign that read, "It's cool inside." And this was not just braggadocio, this was actually truth in advertising. It was the first theater in the state that had air conditioning, right? What the lyric had was 2 places in the theater where they would put a 2-ton block of ice with a fan behind it. So, the Alabama really changed the showplace of the South. It changed the game for everybody. It became very difficult for those 26 other theaters around to keep their doors open. A lot of the vaudeville houses tanked. Probably the burlesques kept going. But in order to compete with the Alabama, other places had to start showing movies, and that's what the lyric did. Even though tickets only cost 25 cents, it was like the dollar theater of its day. So during the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it became this combination of movies and live performance. And they kept it going a remarkably long time, even as entertainment technology was changing. Sort of like the last great technological effort made by the previous owners of the lyric happened in, I guess, 1956. 55, 56, they decided to try Cinerama, or CinemaScope, which is like the IMAX of the 1950s. It had it required 3 screens because there was a big panoramic picture. I had been told that the lyric was actually a terrible place to see movies anyway. Someone told me that they had to put a screen on legs, and at the beginning of every movie, they would shine an image, and then lean the screen back, and then lean it forward until the image came into focus. So not an ideal house in some ways. Actually, not too long ago, I was giving a talk at the Birmingham Country Club about the history of the theater district, and I had just stood up, and this woman in the audience went, "Honey, you mind if I say something before you get started?" And I said, "No, ma'am, go ahead." And she said, "You know what we used to say about the lyric?" And I said, "What's that?" She said, "Well, we said you got to bring 2 sticks. One to hold your chair up, and the other to beat the rats away." I thought, oh, good. Thank you for that introduction. So my point in telling you some of these stories is that not only, the new movies were going to the Alabama, and the second run stuff was coming to the lyric. So not only is it second run at that point, but maybe a little second rate. When they decided to try Cinerama, they tore out 12 beautiful opera boxes. Like, the seats where the guys in the Muppets are sitting? We had 12 of those, but they tore them out to add the additional screens. Even Cinerama could not save the lyric. It closed in 1958, and the property was dormant through the 60s. The lobby was bricked up. It became a retail space. The theater itself was sort of entombed. It reopened again in the early 70s as an art house movie theater. It closed and reopened one more time, first as the Foxy, and then as the Roxy. And under both of those names, it was a house of adult entertainment. And what the late, great Cecil Whitmire explained to me was that the last theatrical presentation at the Lyric was a screening of the movie Deep Throat, and that the projectionist was arrested after it had been playing for 10 days. I said this on a tour not too long ago, and somebody went, 10 days? And I said, yeah. And the guy said, well, Glenny, everybody in town had seen it at that point. As a lot of you know, for the last year and some change, the last maybe 15 months, I have been working alongside this magnificent rock star fundraiser named Tom Cosby, who raised $7 million for the Lyric in 9 months. Yay! Thank you, Tom! That was not an easy task, but frequently Tom and I were giving presentations to fancy foundations and high net worth individuals and CEOs, and Tom would frequently lean over to me and say, Glenny, please don't talk about the pornography today. But I always did. I almost always did, because I really felt that this happened at theaters in New York. It happened on Broadway. It happened in Los Angeles. It's a fate that the Alabama Theater narrowly escaped, and it's just this other way that the Lyric really represents this part of American theater history. I have a friend who is fond of saying that the Lyric is the new terminal station. And I think what he means by that is that theater really represents this an opportunity for this city to sort of buttress its future by preserving and repurposing a piece of its past. The terminal station was easily the most magnificent building this city ever had, but it was torn down in 1969 with really relatively little public outcry. That won't happen at the Lyric, and it won't happen because we made saving that place a matter of civic consciousness and civic conscience. And I am so proud of that. Lately I've had this problem that everybody thinks I raised $7 million. I didn't. All I did was show people. And show people. So that's what I did. And that's what I do. And I feel so lucky that I get to do it. I have this funny thing going on in my head that whenever I'm in the Lyric, it's kind of like the past and the present and the future are always happening for me simultaneously. Even though the place is mostly empty right now, when I'm there, there are actors and acrobats and dancers and vaudevillians, and even though it's the 21st century, I'm wearing a flapper dress and a strand of pearls, and I've got a bob haircut, and you are there too, in a top hat and tails, waiting for me at the ticket window every night. And I cross the lobby to take your arm, and I can hear somebody playing ragtime piano, and I can hear somebody else telling jokes on stage, and by the time we get to our seats, the curtain's coming up, and the show hasn't even started, but I already know how it's gonna end. This city is a hard place. Birmingham, historically speaking, has preferred to lose things and mourn that loss forever, rather than holding on to it. And I have all these crazy romantic show business notions about history and vaudeville and the Lyric, but I have staked a lot in the last couple of years on this idea that if we could save the Lyric, I think we could save ourselves. And I am hoping that you will show me that. Thanks.
Another round of